So you may have heard about the tragedy at Impact Plastics in East Tennessee. 11 workers were swept away in floodwaters during Hurricane Helene. Now one of those families has sued Impact Plastics for wrongful death. And the allegation is that the employer knew that the floodwaters were coming, knew that the building was in a floodplain, kept the workers there, did not allow them to evacuate, and as a result, they died. What you might not know is that these workers could get their lawsuit thrown out entirely. And even if they win, they will probably be capped, which I've done a video on before, but capped in their damages at $750,000 or possibly $1 million, depending on whether they have minor dependents. But let's talk about the first thing. How could this lawsuit get thrown out and why might they get nothing? Well, there's something called workers' compensation. And if you don't know what that is, essentially, if you're injured at work, you're going to be entitled to some sort of compensation if your injury arises out of your employment. As a result of that, you can't sue your employer what's called in tort or in a lawsuit. So you don't have to prove that your employer was negligent, and you'll get some sort of compensation, but you won't get 100% of what your injuries are. You won't get fully compensated. And that's called the grand bargain or the grand deal of workers' compensation. And the idea is workers get compensated even if the injury is their own fault. You know, you stick your hand in a machine, you make a mistake at work and you cause your own injury, your employer will still pay for that, but you're not going to get paid the full extent of your injury. So as a result of workers' compensation, it's what's known as the exclusive remedy. It's the only way you can recover against your employer. Even if your employer is negligent, you're still limited to the workers' compensation scheme. So what does that mean? So the workers' compensation death benefit could be as little as $20,000 by statute. Now, just put that in perspective, the lawsuit that I've seen, they're suing for $25 million. Now, we can get into why I think that number is probably overly optimistic, but the point is, if this lawsuit gets thrown out because a judge says, look, this really arose out of your employment, not only are they not getting $25 million, the most they're going to get, some of them potentially, is $20,000. There's different calculations based on how many dependents you have and what your wages were, but it could be as low as that. So Tennessee doesn't have an exception for reckless misconduct of the employer. Some states say if your employer was reckless, you can sue them at the courthouse. You don't have to take $20,000 from the workers' comp scheme. You can go to court. Tennessee doesn't do that. So maybe this case will raise awareness that there really should be a recklessness exception because what happened here was so horrible. So let's say they get around the workers' compensation limits and prove that this flood injury, the death during the flood, doesn't arise out of employment, and so we get to go to a lawsuit. There is a concept in the law called pain and suffering or non-economic damages. And one thing that you could compensate here is this victim sat in the back of a pickup truck, knew that the floodwaters were rising, knew he was trapped, knew he was going to die, was texting his daughter, I love you, last words, and then he ultimately did die. Now, a jury would be asked in a normal situation to put a value on that experience, that conscious apprehension of death. The most that you could get in this state for that is $750,000. It's the most that they'll allow a jury to award. Now, the jury doesn't get told that that's the limit. The jury goes, and they often do, they'll award millions of dollars for something like that. And the legislature has capped that. So the lawsuit alleges that this cap doesn't apply. We'll see, but put the big number in there. If they want $25 million. Well, probably the most you're going to get is $750,000 plus whatever economic damages you can get. And an economist will say, this victim was working and earning XYZ, and this was the economic value of their life plus $750,000. That's it. And that is an injustice because the whole point of lawsuits like this isn't just to compensate the family and the victims, but also to hold the wrongdoers accountable, to be a check on corporate greed, on reckless conduct, on profits over people. And if you have a cap That doesn't happen. There's no accountability. There's also a cap on punitive damages in the state of Tennessee. That's the drop in the bucket to a lot of publicly traded companies. That holds no one accountable. So the whole tort system in this state uh, is backwards, because what you are essentially doing is providing corporate welfare to the worst offenders. It's only the people who have caused the most serious injuries who will benefit from a cap on damages. It's only when you're talking about damages, the death cases, severe injuries, only then are we even in the stratosphere where those damages would be in that range. So why do we take the most severely injured people and make them subsidize corporate misconduct? So if that bothers you, I've got a link. You can go sign our petition to change this law. But I really think most Tennesseans have no idea about any of this. And that's why I'm making this video, because they only get away with these kinds of laws if no one's paying attention.